All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Choosing the Right Goat webinar series. If you're just tuning in tonight, welcome, but if you were here last night, welcome again. So I'll just quickly do a bit of intro about StockSense. So StockSense is a project run by the Victorian Farmers Federation. We are funded by the Cattle Compensation Fund and the Sheep and Goat Compensation Fund, and proudly delivered by the VFF Livestock Group. StockSense was established to help Victorian livestock producers maintain and improve animal health and welfare, as well as Victoria's overall biosecurity status. So we do this through numerous ways. We run educational workshops around the state. We have webinars like the one you're watching tonight. We develop fact sheets, which are on our website, and we release industry material through social media and our e-newsletter. So that's just some upcoming workshops. So if you want to attend them, you can find them on our website or socials. So yeah, definitely check them out. But tonight we're lucky enough to be joined by John and Marlene. So tonight's schedule will run from 6 to 7:30. John will cover all things about mohair, so around half an hour, and Marlene will cover boar goats or meat goats. And then we'll have about half an hour Q&A. So just a few housekeeping. So there'll be a Q&A at the end. So type in your answers as we go along and I'll read them out at the end. They're anonymous. So as soon as you have a question, just type them in and then we'll get to them at the end. So it'll be, yeah, 1 hour presentation followed by the 30 minutes Q&A. And then these slides, I'll send them out to everyone, the presentations, and then the recording will be uploaded to our YouTube account. At the end, I also have a QR code you can scan. It's just for our survey. And you can subscribe to our YouTube channel. These are just a few ways you can stay in touch. So we have our email there, website, and we also have Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. So I'll now pass over to John and he can kick us off.
Good evening. I'm presenting farming Angoras for the production of mohair. This is a photo just of some typical breeding does that you have within the industry. You can see how the mohair grows on the animal. It's in a lock structure. The preamble, Angoras are a fiber producing animal. They produce one of the rarest fibers in the world, which the fiber they produce ranges from the first shearing of a 23 microns to a 30 to a 45 micron, depending on age. Mohair does grow at a rate of that vary between 20 mil and 40 millimeters per month. So one needs to be very much aware of that, especially the young ones, because they can grow quite a long fleece in their first 6 months. And so you have to be very much aware of that. Mohair is used in fashion and homeware products. Hand spinners seek mohair for its quality and uniqueness in hand knitting. It's a very versatile fiber that you'll find that it's some of the best suits in the world with blended with wool or cashmere or you go to the homewares and it can go into carpets or into velours. One thing that one needs to be careful of when you're farming Angoras is the goat welfare standards, which has just been completed in 2026. And I would recommend that you look that up and see the guidelines on running goats. And those guidelines cover all breeds of goats, not just Angoras. Council requirements for your property. So you need to seek whether it is a rural or urban environment, what your property is listed, because there's certain restrictions if you're listed as urban on whether you can have livestock in that situation. The next thing, do you have a pick number? Because if you have animals, whether it's a horse or other animals, And especially with Angoras or other type of goats, you need to have what they call a property identification number. Because if an outbreak of disease does happen, then they've got a list of all the people to try and protect your animals from being infected. Biosecurity, you need to have this considered for your property. That is not allowing other animals on your property or people that drive onto one property and onto your property and so forth, because it is very important that you're very careful of contamination, because otherwise you can bring a disease in. With a vet, you need to speak to your local vet. Now, if they're not specializing in goats or don't have a variety, then seek another vet to assist you, because they'll be able to help you with a lot of ailments or things that may happen along the line. Considerations for before purchasing Angoras. One is fencing. You'll hear people say that Angoras are very much hard to keep in, but they're not. They're very, very easy animal, and they respond very much to human contact. So you need to check your fencing. It can be made up of plain wires or hinge joint ring lock, etc., which will hold the animals. You'll find that the Angoras will have a tendency more to go underneath the fence or through holes that have been created by other livestock, or kangaroos are probably your worst of putting a nice hole under your lovely brand new fence, and the goats may happen to wander out following them. So just consider those items on your fence. Do you have adequate sheds on your property? Because the Angoras require shearing every 6 months. So you need to have an area where either you shear them yourself or have a shearer come in to be able to shear the animal, that you're not in direct sunlight and out of the rain or those sort of considerations. Because that way then you can protect the fibre that's coming off from impurities like dirt, hay, or other items. Do you have adequate shelter facilities? The Angoras will require shelter for approximately 4 to 6 weeks after shearing if the weather should become inclement. And the reason for that is the Angoras do not have a fat layer. They have more like a fluid just under the skin, and they're very susceptible to sudden changes in temperatures, especially your summer months, where you may have a drop in temperature of 10, 15 degrees, and they can have a wind chill factor if there's a very cold wind and rain. They're an animal that can suffer, but so do a lot of other animals suffer from the chill. So one needs to give the animals an opportunity where they can seek that shelter. And if they know that it's there, you'll find that they're a very smart animal and actually seek that shelter if the weather does change. That is a typical shearer and how you shear an Angora. You shear them exactly the same way as a sheep, but your shearing plant actually runs at a much lower speed because it will get very hot, because the mohair lacks grease like wool, so therefore it doesn't have that grease to help keep the handpiece cooler. So just needs to be aware. Understanding mohair production. Mohair requires protein to grow. So feeding an Angora requires that they receive adequate protein to not only maintain their body condition, but also additional protein to grow a good quality fleece. because if an animal, especially in your colder months, will use more protein to keep warm and not produce as much fleece in length. But if you keep adequate and above the requirements of the body, then the fleece will continue to grow. If you are going to breed Angoras, for further understanding of feed requirements for breeding does requires an understanding of their protein requirements during pregnancy, rearing of kid or kids, because they will have twins, and in producing fleece. So you are putting a lot of pressure on a breeding doe if you don't consider the quality of your feed. The other thing is the pros and cons for either running breeding does or wethers. Ascertain what your goals are. Do you want to produce mohair, or do you want to produce animals, produce kids and breed and self-replace? Whereas if you're running wethers, you would buy your wethers after every 3 years, 4 years as the fleece from there. But certainly, yes, consider how much you've got there. The further considerations is, like I mentioned earlier, is your shearing facilities, because as you saw in a previous photograph of a shearer, he needs adequate area to be able to stand and move the animal around while shearing. So you're looking at a facility that you'd want at least 1 to 2 meters of area that's clear for the shearer to work in, because the animals will move. The bigger the animals, the slightly longer distance they need for when they shear certain positions. And you need a place where that they can hold the animals pre the shearer shearing them, and for putting the animals that have been shorn into another pen in another area so that they're out of the way. Your next one is considering the kidding facilities for your breeding does if you're going to breed your live animals, Angoras, because you either got to make a decision that you let them kid outside, and with letting them kid outside, you've got to be aware of your conditions around. The cold and wind and rain will have an effect on your kids when they're born. Or you can have a shed where they can get into, and you can have various products on the floor, straw or hay, and the does can kid in there, and the kids will remain out of the weather and stay warm. So that's the sort of thing that you need to just think about. They're simple things, and quite often your does, breeding does, will choose where they want to kid. Now, with your breeding days, you're going to have bucks. You're going to need to be very careful that when you're out of your mating season, that you need to be able to keep your bucks in an area that is safe, but not only them, but also that for getting out and maybe joining your does at the wrong time of year. And one must realise that the bucks are much stronger, and therefore you must consider the type of environment where they're being contained in. Your pasture, you need to consider the quality of it, because that will make a decision to you of whether your does or your wethers can adequately maintain body condition, grow, produce mohair, or whether, if it is not of substantial quality in protein, then you may have to then consider the purchasing of fodder, and that can either be through hay, grain, or prepared feed mixes that are where you can from food merchants. Because if your pasture is down and not adequate protein, then you need to supplement them, depending on the time of year, whether they've got kids producing the milk for the kids, or whether they're maintaining just for themselves in the cold winter months. So you need to do some considerations of working out the quality of your paddock. And sometimes you may need to re-establish some of your pasture to increase its quality. When purchasing your fodder, hay, grain, you need to look at what storage facilities you have, because there is nothing worse than buying some hay, good quality hay or grain, and then suddenly you've found that there's vermin or there's insects that have got into that and contaminated. And once vermin and insects contaminate your feed, you'll find that your animals may not eat any of that fodder. And you've wasted time and effort of purchasing it and storing it, and that's money down the drain. The other thing you need to be aware of, that the way the does have their kids, if they are out in a open area, be careful at night of foxes or stray dogs coming in. Foxes are very much looking, and they will find kids that are hiding. The mothers may go off and browse for a little while in the paddock during the night. And if foxes are wandering around, they'll just take the kid. And sometimes it has been seen where two foxes come in together and they will work to keep the mother occupied, and then the other one pinches the kid. So you've just got to be a little bit aware of those sort of situations. And you do find that you can have, if you're semi-urban, that you'll have town dogs that may be wandering during the night and the owners do not know, and they will come and find and either take your kids or kill them or attack the does as well. So these are just some of the things that you just need to be aware of. That's another group of breeding does that are out in an open paddock. As you can see, that they're very good browsing animals, and they will work the environment to what they believe. They're an animal that will move a lot. I've found on my property that they will just continue to look for food and then you just move them on to the next paddock. Other considerations is you need to learn and understand about the health requirements of the animals by getting to know your vet. Then you'll find at times that sometimes they may need drenches or they may need drugs because you might find that they've injured themselves or they may have picked up worms. But if you're careful on when you purchase your livestock if you test your animals for worms and things like that and do the correct drenches according to your vet's requirements, then you may not need drenches very often after that because your property is free if you haven't had goats on there before. So, and some of the drugs, the animal might injure itself, might need veterinary requirements, and you'll need to follow the veterinary requirements for administering those drugs. Also, go online we get to slide 15, you'll see that there's a number of contacts available, and I'll speak of them when we get to there. Now, you need to also obtain the necessary equipment to be able to administer the required drenches and drugs as required, because you need to be able to, if you're informed you need to give a certain amount of drench, you need to give it precisely, because if you under drench, you won't assist your animal in removing the worms, and drugs can be a waste of time also, that if they're not administered to the required amounts. And by having the correct equipment, then you should be able to administer those drenches and drugs. and therefore hopefully that, yes, your animals will then recover and be back to normal health. After shearing, you need to store your fleece correctly to avoid contamination from insect damage or synthetic particles. And what I mean by insect damage is that moths that eat your clothes love raw fibre. And if you find just leave it sitting around the shed, in a very short time, those moths come out from anywhere. And suddenly they will turn your prized fleece into dust. And it will become unacceptable for the trade to use. Or you want to hand spin it yourself, it'll be of no value. The synthetic particles are that some people put them into shopping bags or into chaff bags, loosened bags. That's great if they're brand new. But if you happen to leave them where sun can contact them, you'll find that the plastic bags will disintegrate, and so will the chaff bags, and become very small fragments. And once that's contaminates your fleece, you'll find that it'll be unsaleable, like insect damage. So you have lost one of your most valuable parts of the animal through just not having an understanding of insect or synthetic particles, because it is your most precious product. Because at the moment, mohair is very much prices of value are way in excess of sometimes double or triple that of wool. The next is your environment, is understanding what you have. You need to, will assist you in making decisions with the maintaining of your animals in good condition and production of quality mohair that you will be proud of. And what we're talking about is an understanding of the weeds, assist with avoiding vegetable fold contamination in mohair, and potential plant poisoning, because certain plants will have a diverse effect on your animals. And if you're not sure on these plants, have them and check them out with a plant specialist, or speak with your vet, who may be able to tell you that certain plants are toxic to goats. But you will find that the Angoras are very good at reducing the number of weeds on your property. They are a browsing animal and can utilize the weeds in their dietary requirements, which you don't need to use chemicals. And the goats are very smart, as you would find, that they will pick and choose their plants when they wish to have them. And quite often they'll wait until they're flowering, and they will consume all the seed heads and flower heads, which stops them. They can still grow, but they can't drop their seeds to create next year's crop of weeds. So, which is magnificent. But you just need to be aware of certain plants. Too much will create that plant poisoning in the animal. So just be aware of that, but small amounts, and they can adjust to it. That's a picture of a typical buck, very big frame, solid. And as you can see there, that looking at the previous photos of the does, that this is where that you need to have good facilities to be able to maintain and hold these bucks. And always treat them with respect. Yes, they can be your best friend, but they can also hurt you without thinking. So but as you can see there, there's a lot of mohair that grows on the animals. When purchasing, you need to consider the following, and don't be scared to ask the breeder. And if they're not willing to give this information, I'd be hesitant. Request the drenching history and the products they have used. because sometimes you might find that if they're consistently drenching, maybe they're not actually giving the correct drench dose rate. So, and the other one that's people get very caught up, and because of their long fleece, a lot of them don't realize until they see the animal scratch a bit, is whether they're free of lice. And lice can be one of the hardest things to remove if you do not do the correct dosage. And lice will create a beautiful fleece, and because of their scratching and itching, will turn it into a very poor quality fleece. Look at the ages of the animals. You can check the age of the animal by checking the amount of teeth, and you can go on to agricultural websites, the department, and they can explain how to work out their age by their teeth. And once you understand the teeth, then you can see the animals, because you don't want to be told that these are all young animals, and then you find and you get them home and they're all full mouth animals and they're long in the teeth, and yeah, they're not little young 2-year-old does, but they're actually 5-year-old does. So be very wary of the age that they're trying to sell to you. Inspect the quality of the fibre on the animal. It's check the mohair, because you can still look at the body of the fibre, open it up on the sides and from front to back, and see how the quality of the lock structure, how it opens, and the length of it, because one needs to look at it and say, well, if the person says that it's 6 months growth, well, then you need to work out the length of that. It's not only 50 millimeters, but it should be probably closer to 100 millimeters or things like that. So you've got to be careful of that quality of the fibre, because there's no use paying good money for an animal that's not going to produce you a fibre that of very little value. Have a look at their body condition. You can test their body condition by putting your hand on their back. And also you can look up on various sites how to ascertain body condition, because there's nothing that you would like to see that you put your hand on the back of the animal and all you're feeling is the backbone and the top part of their ribs. They need to have some eye muscle area to fill in to say that yes, they're healthy, because if they're going to be skinny, then you might find that there might be some health issues with those animals. The other thing is looking at their conformation. Like on that picture of the buck, look for good frames. You don't want animals that have got crooked legs or injuries, because sometimes you might find that the legs might have been damaged as they're growing up. You might find that if they're narrow in the chest, then they don't have capacity to breathe if they're very narrow, or in very big chest animals, you may find that those type of animals may have problems of their progeny being able to have kids, because it's important that you have the right size so that the kids can be come out at birth relatively easy, because otherwise there's very hard that if you've got a very big kids because of the conformation of your animals, that you could end up calling the vet for each doe that's having a kid. So yes, just be careful. The back end, how the legs are straight, the back line is straight. And also just consider also in the horn area that you've got some width between the horns, because the animals will fight amongst themselves and they can easily break a leg by putting another animal's horn between their horns and then twisting. So there's just a few little things that you just need. As I was just saying before, that's an animal that you can look at the fleece there and you can see the style and the character, the quality of the fleece. And one would say that that's holding about 6 months fleece. And if you look at that, that's good, top quality fibre. Yeah, you might find that it's difficult to find all your animals that you're going to purchase like that, but that's what you would like to be aiming for in purchasing your animals. And that would be, I would say, around about a 2 to 3 year old animal. Good quality fleece, good lock structure, and would have a good conformation with that. In management wise, we got to look at animals wise, is your shearing shed, yards, paddocks, equipment required, husbandry, and or does or wethers, because they're the sort of things that you need to consider and require. And whether you run does or wethers will depend on what labour you've got. Now, for breeding or running wethers is your time constraints. If you're working full time, you may not have adequate time to have breeding does and having kids and looking after bucks. Your facilities, ease of handling is because if you've got good facilities, it is easy to work with them, to shear them, to drench them, to do any number of issues, trim their hoofs, because if your facilities are good, then it makes it easy. Because if you're fighting the animals, you will be very tired at the end of the day. And all that's become is the animals become frustrated and you as the owners frustrated. Is your nutritional requirements, additional feeding. If, and like I said, you may find that, you've got to come home from work or you've got to feed these animals extra. That takes time. So that's why you've got to work out your labour and what time you have. Your shearing and sorting of the fleece. This takes time. It's if you want to get full value from your fleece, then you need to spend the time in looking after that mohair and having a good shearer to removing the fibre. Then you're looking at being able to get good quality value. Market. Do you, excuse me, do you have a plan for your mohair that is either selling to a buyer or a broker, selling to a hand spinner, or making products from your own mohair? That will depend on the number of animals you've got. But they're the options that you need to consider what you're going to do with the mohair. The next one is, do you have a plan for your excess or cull animals, to selling animals to other Angora producers or sending them to the abattoirs, meat works to go into the meat industry? There's just a couple more considerations that you need to look at. Now, for the final information, these are the contacts that you've got. Mohair Australia, you've got the gateway to the goat fibre. You have the Goat Industry Council. You can attend field days, major shows, contact breeders within your area. They'll be only too happy to assist. You've got the Department of Agriculture, which can help you on the statutory requirements. Then you've got the Meat and Livestock Authority, which have the goats hub. Oh, my apologies. So you've got that. So you've got a lot of contacts which you have throughout the industry. So, all right, thank you. Now, just my final thing. Mohair is one of the small group of fibres in the world which are known as fibres of the gods. There's about 8 fibres, and its major attributes is luster, handle, strength, low shrinkage, low creasability, fire resistance. And if you've ever worn mohair or had it in a product, you will find that it is just unbelievable to and why it's called the diamond fibre. It is a luxury fibre. And all right, I think that's about all I think I got. Back to you, Jack.
Awesome. Thanks, John. That was great. While Marlene's getting her slides up, also just if you got any questions for John, just type them in now. We won't get them to after Marlene's, but yeah, just do them now so you don't forget. But yeah, I'll pass over to Marlene and she'll get us kicked off. So thank you, Marlene.
Good evening, everybody. Has that gone to big screen? There we go. My name's Marlene. I've been working and breeding with Boer goats for the last 18 years. I breed them on small acreage. I've got 25 acres and it's poverty land. So I have my challenges that I've dealt with and learnt to deal with over the years. And tonight I'm going to introduce you to meet the Boer goat. Opening frame, I call this a red Boer. Some people call them Kalaharis. And the little fella down the bottom, he's 2 weeks old, and the big fella was about the same size at 2 weeks old as well. So as you can see, they can grow quite large, especially the bucks, and the guy in the top photo still got another year of growth yet before he's full grown. Some quick facts. These animals originated in South Africa. Mostly a group of farmers in the Eastern Cape of South Africa decided that they needed to create more meat on their own indigenous goat. And so they started working as a team to get more meat by being highly selective. They then wanted to start being able to find those animals easily in large areas. So they then started selecting on colour. So a standard Boer goat has a white body and a red head. And then there's the red Boers. They are much harder to find in the veld over there. Goat meat is the most eaten meat in the world, and funnily enough, Australia is the largest exporter of goat meat around the world. Why would you want to breed a Boer goat or have it on a small acreage? As far as growth rates, the kids grow up to and sometimes more than 250 grams a day. As far as the meat goes, it's low fat, low cholesterol, and high in protein. It is a hardy animal and well suited to Australia. So in the Eastern Cape, it's hard, arid country. And when they were first introduced to Australia and sent out to breed with rangeland goats, the fat of large feral goats and their temperaments wasn't considered, because the Boer goat has a good temperament and it will walk away instead of having a fight to death, because these animals are bred to be able to work with, even though that they can be up to 140 kilos, and be gentle and be easy to handle. So that initial introduction didn't work very well, because a picture hadn't been developed of all the different traits and how things work. Fertility wise, 200% kidding is achievable all the time, and in some genetic lines you'll get 300 to 400% kidding rate with them, with survivability through to weaning. So twins is usual, triplets is not that unusual, and they can carry quads as well. They're great at weed control, because they are natural browsers, not grazers. A lot of the time, these animals have had to transition from being a browser to being a grazer because they get farmed in a similar way to sheep. And by doing that, that's where we start to get parasite problems and general worm problems, because their natural body was designed to be browsing above the ground. They are generally low maintenance. Like, you do have to put time and effort into any livestock. The Boer goats are lower maintenance in the fact that you don't have to milk them once or twice a day, and you don't have to shear them every 6 months. But they still require, husbandry, whether that be vaccinations, drenching, hoof trimming. That's just looking after livestock across the board. They generally docile animals, and where people can run into trouble with them is that people underestimate the animal's intelligence. They are as intelligent as the most clever dogs in the world. And if you keep that in your mind when you're working with your stock, that will help to keep you out of trouble, because they will outwit you every time. The suitability for hobby farms and small acreage, as John has already mentioned, nutritional availability is very important. Firstly, boars being a meat animal, they need protein to grow muscle. From where I live and what I've found, if there's protein level around of about 16%, then that will keep them in good condition and will also help them develop a really good carcass. Now, that can be achieved by natural browse, but to know that you're doing that properly, I would suggest that you have contact with an agronomist to work out what you have on your property if you don't already know. And as John has also said, during winter, especially in Victoria, when you get those beautiful freezing polar winds coming up the state, and nasty frosts, you have no nutritional value left in your grasses when that happens, and these animals need to be supplemented. So during summer, like if you've got good land and good nutrition availability, then that's fine. But during winter, you will have to supplement them when it's cold. As I've already said, goats do require management, especially once they're being farmed on smaller acreage, because they need the hoof trimming, they need parasites, and those will be the main contenders that you'll have to deal with. There's some cost savers to these management costs. So there's lots of places now that you can learn how to do worm counts. And that's really important, especially if there's something happening and the animals have got a high worm load. If you can go and get a sample and put it under the microscope at home, then that's time saved from sending it somewhere to get a test result. It's really important to always do a worm count before you drench, because if there's some people that I've met and come across, and they just drench their animals every 4 to 6 weeks. And what that does is it builds a resistance to that drench within animals, and there has been an increasing problem within Australia to goats becoming resistant to especially the newer drenches that have been released. It's really hard to get goat-approved drenches, so it makes it even more difficult if people start using them willy-nilly and build resistance to them. A lot of companies won't spend the money on doing the research for goats. If you do have to step outside what's been approved, then you need to have a discussion with your vet to get a prescription to be able to use an off-label drench. And sometimes having a talk to your local DPI vet is really useful to find out the main types of worms that are happening during that period of time in your area. And they have lots of helpful advice as well. So you need to build a relationship with a local vet, but also the DPI vets are also very knowledgeable and very helpful to make contact with. Paddock rotation, if you're on smaller properties, is a good way to help with parasite management. So if you subdivide 4 paddocks and you slowly move them around, a paddock needs a minimum of 3 months to be able to replenish itself and to get long enough to help decrease worm load. You'll find that goats don't eat grass down to the dirt, and they'll always leave it shorter, so it'll look like your lawn's been mowed. But as the grass gets shorter, that's when the parasites can move up the grass and then enter the animal's body. So rotation is a good way to help with parasite loads. Form relationships with other breeders that are close to you, and they will help share knowledge about what drenches are allowed, what's effective in your area, because I've come across people that, say on the coast, they have to use certain types of drenches because other drenches don't work in that environment. So it's something to keep in mind. Finding a vet that knows goats is a challenge. Lots of vets don't have a good knowledge of goats and how goats work. So it's worth putting in the time and asking questions and asking other breeders about who their vet is, who they use, and who is knowledgeable about goats. Fencing, using good fencing is highly important. I use 70-90-30 ring lock with an electric offset. The electric offset is actually not to stop them jumping out, it's to stop them rubbing on the fence, because when they shed their coat, they just love putting their whole weight against that ring lock, and down the fence they run, and it just stretches it out. So by running a short hot wire offset off your fence will actually make your fences last a lot longer, and it helps prevent the wombats as well. I get wombats here and they don't like the hot wire touching their backs, so that saves a few escape routes for the goats as well. I use that instead of that. Breeding plans. If you're going to breed Boer goats, or if you're going to breed any goat, you need to have a plan before you even think about buying your first goat. Are you going to have a commercial focus? Are you going to have a focus on breeding stud animals? If you're on small acreage, it's really hard to run a commercial operation and make money. What's involved with that is researching and finding a market, a local abattoir, and that's hugely challenging in Victoria, I'm led to believe. licenses, food handling certificates, all of that sort of thing if you're going to do farm to plate, paddock to plate. Or the other option you can take if you want to go down that track is to network and find your own restaurant market supply, and then you have to go through the abattoir and through a butcher to follow that process, and then delivery to a restaurant. When the market was really low when we first started breeding, I think it was 90 cents a kilo at the abattoirs for goats. We developed our own little market for a while, and it was good. It was profitable, but it took a lot of work and a lot of time. And both of us were working full time as well, so we were basically working 3 jobs, and we were pleased the market picked up again, and we stopped doing that. But it kept us going and kept the animals fed while we were experiencing the waning of the market. Commercial meat buyers, they usually are asking for 50 to 100 head a week. Hence that small acreage is quite, you can't meet that sort of demand. So your other option is to look at stud breeding. That's what I do. Within that stud breeding, I had a focus right from the start that I wanted to breed an animal that could stand and perform in the show ring, but it also had commercial focus, because my largest buyer of my animals are commercial enterprises that run 1,000 breeding does. So I pride myself that I have animals that can stand in the show ring and win, and then go to a Western Division property and survive and thrive and improve the offspring of their does. It takes time, it takes commitment. It doesn't happen overnight. You need to educate yourself about the breed, where you want to go, before you even buy that first goat. If you buy when you buy your foundation stock, you don't need to buy the most expensive does. You can buy average quality does. Where you need to put your investment is into the buck you're going to buy, because the buck must be better than all the does that it's going to join and produce offspring for you. You can attend shows. There's boar goat sections at many of the biggest shows around Australia. In Victoria, there's Shepparton probably has your biggest agricultural show with boar goats. And so if you're interested, turn up and have a look, listen to the judge, what the judge is saying about the animals, and that will help you learn, and talk to the breeders that are there. They will be more than happy to provide you information and share knowledge and give you encouragement. I've always had a saying on my property, because I do have to supplement feed. If I'm going to supplement feed an animal, it's going to cost me the same to supplement feed a good animal as what it is a low quality animal. So I always strive to be feeding, when I have to, good quality animals. And that will put you in good stead. There's many people out there that advertise boar goats, that they're selling boar goats, and it really upsets me, because I take one look at them and they're crossbreds, they're not boar goats. So it is worth spending the time finding breeders that are close to you and having a look, going and seeing their place, seeing their animals, so that you actually get the vision of what the animal should look like and what a good animal is. And then not being caught up buying stock from that are called Boer goats that got nothing to do with the breed at all. Breeding. It's best for does to be approximately 14 to 18 months old before joining them, or 40 kilos live weight. Because they have these multiple births and sometimes triplets, it gives the animal's done its first kind of adult growth burst by the time it's 14 months, and usually cut its 2 teeth by then. So if gestation's 5 months, so that'd make the doe 19 months old. If she has triplets, she's done enough growth and has enough within herself to be able to feed those triplets. If you put a 8-month-old doe kid and it happens to have triplets when it's 13 months old, those kids are not going to grow well if they all survive. Bucks can cover 20 to 40 does, so you don't need 20 of those, you need one good one, and that will be a good starting place for you. Export markets, there's an increasing demand within the export markets presently, but I'd never breed animals with that as my primary focus. Export markets come and go. They can, put in an order, go, yes, we'll buy your 20 does, and they're going to be going out into quarantine on this date. And 6 months later, you'll still be feeding them and looking after them because it gets delayed. So export in my eyes is a bonus that happens once in a while, but it's certainly not something to focus your whole breeding program onto. The beautiful thing about exports with goats is that they get to fly. They don't go on boats. They go on crates, on freight planes. Sometimes they go on passenger planes as well, depending on the size and where they're going to. But yeah, they're it's a bonus market, not something to focus on if you want to get into breeding boars. I think India is probably going to be our next big market to take off. But there's lots of problems at the moment sorting out blue tongue restrictions and things like that. It's one of the biosecurity things for exports. They have many tests that need to be done. There's many requirements that you need to meet as a breeder. So yeah, they're challenging, but it is quite cool that Boer goats go from Australia. They've been to Russia, exported to Russia, all through the Middle East, Philippines, Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam. Some have gone to New Zealand to pick up their quality of their genetics over there as well. So Australian Boer goats have gone all over the world. I believe they will continue to do that and go into expanded markets. But it's a icing on the cake if it happens for you, not something to focus on as a market for a small acreage. Appearance of the basics. Boer goat's meant to be a medium-sized to heavy goat. If it's a standard, it'll have a white body, red head and ears. One of the giveaways between a full-blood Boer goat and something that's crossbred will be the length of the ears. On these bucks, as they get to the size that you've already seen, their ears will come round to the middle of their nostrils. So if you've got someone selling an animal saying it's a Boer goat and it's got short ears like the rangelands have, I can guarantee you it is not a full-blood Boer goat. They need pigmentation underneath their tail. There needs to be pigmentation instead of it just being super pink because of the UV rays and the environment we live in. That pigmentation helps prevent skin cancers. Boer goat people will talk about the Roman head. And the thing about the Roman head with the Boers is that their horns will follow that shape. We keep the handlebars on our Boer goats. They're actually quite handy for catching them, especially when they get a bit bigger. But they're meant to be curved and flow around the body, and then that's what makes them not as dangerous as rangeland goats, hordes and all that. And it's to do with the shape of that head. They should have short hair, loose, supple skin. The average weight of a doe is 70 to 100 kilos, and bucks will go up to 130, 140 kilos. So they're quite large animals in between the does and the bucks. There's a few shots. Adult buck. That was taken probably 15 years ago now, so they're bigger than that now. Adult does, a young buck kid and a young kid doe. Management, as I've said, we need good fencing, drenching, vaccination if you choose to vaccinate your animals depending on where you live. Hoof care is really important. In that photo you can see the one hoof's been trimmed, but it was the same shape as the one on the other side a few minutes earlier. They need clean water. They need feed available that's about 16% protein, and they need shelter. Many years ago, my goats here, they would start to run for the shelter before the first drop of rain came. It's kind of changed over the last 4 years. Once we broke the last drought, I've basically had summers full of rain, and after a while the goats just gave up. They don't run for shelter anymore. They put up with the rain, but they don't like wind and rain. So shelter is really important. And as John pointed out, it's also really important to have that shelter during kidding. It helps mothers bond with their kids. It helps keep those kids safe from predators, and it keeps them warm because they don't have wool like sheep and lambs do, or lambs do. And just for fun, they're really friendly characters. They are addictive. I do warn people, if you get into goats, doesn't matter what breed it is, you will get addicted to them. They all have their own personalities. They all have their own voices, and they are rewarding to breed, and they're nice to work with. Boer goats in Australia has more woman breeders than men. And when the South African judges come over here, they're quite horrified because they don't have too many women breeders over there, let alone women breeders handling 130 kilo bucks. It's always worth going to those shows. asking people, Facebook pages for Boer Goat Australia, MLA. There's always workshops, education. Breed associations have lists of breeders to contact, and because we're all addicted, we're more than happy to help you and give you the information to be successful with breeding Boer goats. Thank you for your time.
Awesome. Thank you, Marlene. That was so great. I've heard of flying pigs, but I haven't heard of flying goats. So there you go. So we might get into questions now. So feel free, everyone, if you want your question answered, now's the time. So down the bottom, you can click on more if you don't see the Q&A there, and just click on the box and ask your questions. So this one's probably aimed at both of you, but how important is finding a vet that kind of specifies in goats, not just sheep? Because I would assume they're a bit harder to find, a goat vet that's, yeah, more across goats.
Um, I think they are hard to find. We get lots of phone calls from people all over, all over the country. They've suddenly run into a problem with their goats and they need a vet. So I have to contact breeders I know that way to try and find out who to send them to. I hear lots of stories of people going to a vet, and vets do what they can, but you know what you know, and they will give it their best attempt, but sometimes they're going up the wrong alleyway because it's a goat, it's not a cow, it's not a sheep, and they're slightly different. That's my experience. What about you, John?
No, it is very important to find a vet because, like I've got a good local vet. She's very good and she's attuned to it, but she's also one that's very much willing to ask other vets in her
Yeah,
profession.
yeah,
There are the odd, very specialised goat people in the industry, but you're looking at some of them live Queensland or other states of Australia. But it is important that if your vet is willing to seek information, that's great because then you know at least they're looking at the best way, because there's certain things that you need to understand, is like Marlene mentioned earlier, is drenches and that, because some of the drenches, because they're not legal for goats, but you need a veterinary officer to assist your decision, because sometimes the amount of drench that you give a goat is different to the sheep label.
mm,
And sometimes it could vary between 1.4 times to almost 1.8 times that of a sheep rate. But you need a vet to be able to explain that situation, because otherwise, yeah, you could create something that's not good for the goat itself. So it's
and in Victoria, like if your local vet doesn't particularly know about goats, you've got Berwin, who's with the DPI, who's very knowledgeable about goats. She's a wealth of knowledge. So, sometimes even suggesting, like maybe could you contact this person if you're not sure and see if they can give you some advice and share some knowledge as well.
yeah.
Very lucky in Victoria.
Yeah,
Yes, no,
also, we have a comment here that vets have networks and colleagues that they can go through more
Yeah,
information. And if your vet does want to learn more about goats, Dr. Sandra Baxendale, Goat Vet Oz, runs an annual online month-long course just for vets in April and May. So that
yep,
might be a handy resource. Yeah, check that out. I've got
yep,
a question more for you, Marlene. So
yep.
in cattle, typically the meat can kind of it can be quite diverse, like with marbling and stuff. In terms of Boer goats, is there anything to aim for, like in terms of meat quality?
Um, there's some really interesting, there's an interesting MLA project going on at the moment in Condobolin, that is looking at EBBs, carcass quality, At Sydney Royal, they introduced an objective measurement class that was scanning a group of goats if you wanted to put it into it in there. And we had a target of a condition score of 3. We wanted, fat score of 3. We wanted intramuscular fat, so marbling through the meat. And that's been going for about 15 years now, and there has been heaps of progress as far as carcass quality from the Boer goats in the last 10 to 15 years. It's progressed hugely. So if you look at a Boer goat and you're wanting to breed commercially, a Boer goat, a meat sheep, cattle for the meat industry, it all has the same conformation necessities. It's just different sizes. And good breeders should already be able to tell you what their carcasses come out like and what their marbling's like and all that sort of thing, because hopefully they've all given it a try from their own property.
Awesome. A similar question, but for you, John, in terms of mohairs. So you mentioned about the fiber, how the age can affect kind of the fiber diameter, like the microns. So is there a range that typically like you aim for as a producer? And like could you just run through in terms like the age and amount of shearings, how the fiber differs in the microns?
Um, with the animal being shorn every 6 months, the first 6 months of a kid fleece is the most valuable fiber, and it's generally has microns running between, say, a 23, 25 microns, generally, because that fine micron at the present time, we're talking in excess of $50 a kilogram, greasy. So if you're comparing that to wool, you're talking about at $60 a kilogram plus in a clean fiber. And that is the fiber that will go into your best suiting material, women's and men's suiting material in the world. So, and the reason is that each manufacturers have got their own blends, whether it's with certain superfine wool or bit of cashmere or bit of alpaca or whatever they use. They've got their own little secrets in their suiting materials. And you'll find that it's a suit or a garment, a woman's garment, that would not crease. You can wear these suits 24 hours a day. That's what they're capable of. Then as it gets stronger, the next shearing will be at least another 2 microns stronger. That will be also used in the fabric, but maybe not quite as the very fine fabrics. But some of it is still using some very top quality fabrics. Then your third shearing is getting into a range of about a 28 to 30 microns. That's going into a fabric that is more resilient. So you're looking at a slightly stronger fabric, slightly heavier, but also it depends on the blends that you mix it with, because all the natural fibers just blend absolutely perfectly together. It's what manufacturer wishes to put together. And as you get older, and once you get to what I call about a sixth shearing fleece, which is a 3-year-old, you're starting to look at maybe a 33, 34 microns, but still in the material, but sometimes going into homewares, your throws or your shawls, things like that, or your capes, that people, the women wear with capes for the winter sort of fashions. So there's that variety. It also goes into your socks. So depending on the fineness of the socks, whether you want a stronger, what you call workwear sock, or a design sock that goes with your suiting or your materials. Then as you get stronger, you're getting up to, say, a 36, 38 micron, and that's where it'll go into your velours or your curtains or uh, your harder wearing products or your fabrics that are for your chairs and things like these, that because it's also very low in static. And it was a material that's used in certain places in planes and that to decrease the static in those situations. And some of the luxury cars run a velour fabric, which has a blend of mohair in it. And it's also used into horse horse rugs, your halters and things like that for your livestock industry because it's a very strong fiber. And once it's woven into those sort of halters, yes, it's quite surprising how much strength it does have. So it's what you call a fiber that as it gets stronger, its product sort of changes with it. But it depends on the quality of the fiber that some of the stronger handling ones can still be used with, a finer fabric or a finer material. It depends what they're looking for, but it's very much from fine suiting to homewares to you name the product. Mohair can be in it.
Awesome.
Very good.
I should have asked you what Mohair can't do. That might have been.
I don't think there's a product that did mohair because there was one I know many years ago that learnt they wanted wool in their product, but wool didn't have the strength. So they produced a mohair core inside of it and then wrapped the wool around it. It gave it the strength, but still held majority of wool in it. So I don't know what product it went into, but that was their way of achieving for their client. They wanted wool, but they wanted the strength that the mohair gave them. But it was just a fine core through the center of it that just gave it. And that's where, people have used it in, like I said, horse halters and things like this because it's soft, but it's strong.
Awesome. All right, we've got a question here kind of directed at both of you. So JD and CAE testing was discussed at a breed association. Testing was not mentioned for Angoras and Boer goats. Is there a difference in these breeds so it's not required?
I can answer for Boers. As far as Yonis go, we were in the Yonis program for numerous years. We left it a few years ago once the state laws all started to change. I run a closed herd anyway, so I'm very aware and of Yonis. And the other one seems to be more dairy based. I've never heard of Boer goats having any problems with that. No, we don't test. To go to any shows, you have to have a minimum of 5 anyway as a status to ensure that you're not going to be taking JD to any shows.
In Angoras, the Yonis is not a problem, but I, for example, is just to protect myself and maybe protect clients that if I do sell animals to, I do actually inject for Yonis. I use the um, Yonis inoculation, but that's only a once-off inoculation that you do that by 16 weeks of age. It's only I do it more as a protection than anything, but I've never had that in 40 years on my property. In regard to CAE, the Angora industry, some 40 years, went through a testing regime of selling animals into New Zealand, left, right, and centre. And we found in the Angora industry that it was well under 0.5%. So it doesn't really affect the Angoras. The only ones that were affected were ones that were actually upgraded in the early days from dairy goats. So so it's more of an issue for the dairy goats, the CAE. So I don't test for CAE because I've never struck it on, like I said, on my property in 40 years. It's I'm not saying that it's not out there, but it's certainly very, very rare.
Awesome. Just touching on the breed societies, we did go over it with Rhonda in last night's webinar. Um, do you see any benefits in joining a breed society? And if there is, kind of, how would you do it? Like, how would you join them and the benefits that you do get from them?
Um, it depends what your breeding focus is. If you're breeding boars purely for pets, then maybe not. If you're breeding boars and you have the intent to sell them, whether they be crossbreds that are being upgraded or the full bloods, then yes, it is worth joining a breed society. Only BGA does an upgrade register. VG Bar and BGA both run full blood registers. Um, if your animal's registered, it's worth more money than an animal that's not registered. You've got a genetic background for your stock, which can be really influential in where you move forward to with your breeding. And you get lots of support. There's people that you can contact. There's education that's provided, and just general networking. And you always find your people within big groups. And I can tell you from being involved in a breed association that with the Boer goats, that's taken me to South Africa, doing judging in South Africa, world shows. I've judged over there as well. I've travelled to New Zealand because of the goats. I've travelled all over Australia because of the goats, and that was from contacts made through a breed association.
The, the mohair industry, we've got one representative organisation, Mohair Australia. They control the stud register for the goats, but they're an association that not just for the stud side, that they're also very much proactive in the industry as a whole of dealing with if it needs to be government institutions or with your Goat Industry Council of Australia. So the society that is not just linked to a stud book. So they're very much trying to look after the industry as a whole.
Yeah.
So therefore, it's they're trying to represent or are representing the whole industry, whether you're a commercial breeder, a small breeder, or a large breeder, because there are issues out there that require a representative from within an industry to be able to, to get their viewpoints across and promote themselves.
Awesome. We've got a question here for you, Marlene. So, someone says they know that someone is milking their Boer goats, and the milk seemed very creamy, although the
Mm.
quantity of the dairy less than a dairy breed, of course. So, do you know about anyone doing that, or is it a common thing, or can you?
Um, Interesting. Numerous years ago, probably about 15 years ago, I know that there was a dairy producer in northern New South Wales who actually introduced boars to his dairy herd to increase that butter fat he was getting, and that allowed him to make camemberts and bries really easily. Um, the boars actually have the most butter fat of any goat, and that's because they're a meat goat, and so those kids need to be growing muscle really fast, and it is really beautiful milk, but their udders aren't designed for milking, hence introducing, crossing them over the dairies to increase the butter fat in the offspring, because the dairies have got the milking udders and the bulls have got the butter fat. Yeah, so yeah, it's happened. It's been happening for quite a while. It's not a widespread thing, but that's an individual choice on what that each dairy person wants to do and what their objective and plan is with their production.
Awesome. We've got a question here kind of about the average lifespan of a goat, but also in terms of value from production, like how long a mohair you typically it would be good to shear for until it kind of tapers off, and maybe Marlene also about when boar goats are kind of yeah sent off to the abattoirs or used for meat, what typically age that kind of is. So
You go first this time, John.
Your most productive Angoras are probably between your 3-year-olds and your 5-year-olds because they're mature mothers that can rear kids. Your first-time mothers sometimes, can be funny. Some are very good and some are, what's all this brand new enterprise, having a kid on the ground. In mohair wise, we've certainly improved our quality of mohair, that we are still producing some very good quality mohair on a 5-6-year-old breeding does. So whereas if some 40 years ago, yes, it was sort of mohair was running out of quality wise, but nowadays the quality of the mohair is, and it is still quite sought after, that stronger mohair, that 36 microns, 38 microns, because it's now much through genetics, like all breeds. It's improved the quality of the mohair, the handle of the mohair, and yes, it's probably increased its market where it goes into now. So but probably your most productive years are probably between that 3 and 5 years of age. But certainly if you've got good quality does that are 6 or 7, then yes, if they can still rear their kids and produce good mohair, yes, you keep breeding.
Okay. A couple of parts to the question for me to answer. We'll start with the market as far as meat goes. That's really dependent on what your market is. So there's a Capretto market, and that's a milk-fed kid, and they usually want a carcass that's about 8 kilos. It's actually really hard to achieve with boars because they grow so fast. So, like on my property, an 8-kilo carcass, the kid would only be maybe 6 weeks old, 7 weeks old. But that's a very specialized market. The most profitable time to send kids to market is around the 5-month mark, because that's where they do their most intensive growing. And then they slow down a bit from, say, 5 months to 8 months. So you don't gain a lot of carcass gain during that time. And then after that, they start heading towards cutting 2 teeth. And so they start another growth cycle again. So it depends on your market. Some people are just starting to learn that if they buy in a 50-kilo Boer weather, that it's not some tough old thing that's 10 years old, that it's actually probably 12 months old and it's really good eating. And there's a whole lot of learning happening with what Boer carcasses are able to provide. As far as breeding animals go, I've had does that have been like really good producers for me. They'd done a really good job. and they were 10 years old and they still fed triplets who grew well. So it depends on as far as breeding and how long they can breed for. If you breed them twice, if you breed them back to back all the time, then their breeding life is going to be much shorter. If you breed them once a year, they will still breed kids for you if you provide the right nutrition and the right husbandry and care as 10-year-olds. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, perfect.
Yep. Cool.
All right, it's 7:30 now, so I'll just get up our survey. So if you haven't filled this in, it'd be great if you could just scan that with your phone and then fill it in. It just helps us to be able to keep running these in the future. So yeah, I'd like to thank John and Marlene for those awesome presentations. I'm sure everyone took something away, and yeah, thank you both.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
All right, thanks
Thanks for having
everyone.
me.
No worries. All right, bye.